Hello everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This is Top 5 Wednesday. If you are new to Top 5 Wednesday, I will leave a link to the Goodreads group down below for topics, etc., etc. And this week's theme is a freebie. I decided that I wanted to make a video about the books that have been on my TBR the longest. This is my physical TBR. If I included my Goodreads TBR, I would go down a rabbit hole of trying to purge other titles that I no longer care about off of that Goodreads TBR. So these are the physical books that I've actually had sitting on my shelves for the longest amount of time. Now I went ahead and did the math, and it seems that I haven't had any books for longer than 2 years that I haven't read, which is pretty good for me. I, especially last year, really tried to be more cognizant of rereading the books that I have, mindfully acquiring new books, and getting through the books that I had on my shelves before either purchasing new ones or borrowing from the library, etc. And I think I did a pretty good job of that. However, there are still a few hangers-on that have been on my shelf since even before Sean and I moved to Seattle, which wasn't that long ago, but for me to bring a book all the way across the country that I still haven't read feels like maybe I should light a bit of a fire under myself to get those books read. So let's go ahead and without any further ado get into the books. We'll start with the ones that I've had the longest. These three were from way back in the day when I was working still in Florida at the bookstore. The first one is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. Normally, if I'd had a book for about 2 years and hadn't read it, I would have decluttered it, given away, lent it to a friend, stuff like that. However, these three books, especially this one, are ones that I am all saving for the next time I'm able to do the Tome Topple Readathon, which is my favorite readathon. You read books that are over 500 pages. It's really great. All these books would be perfect for that. Haven't had time to actually do the Tome Topple in the last 2 or 3 times, maybe. It's been a year since I've actually been able to participate in the Tome Topple. But one of the hosts, Sam from Thoughts on Tomes, this is one of her favorite books, so I know I'm holding on to it because we tend to really like the same things and have the same tastes. The next book is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is a Nebula finalist. It is a epic fantasy silk punk first book in a series. Yeah, book 1 of the Dandelion Dynasty. I think I've talked about this book on my channel before. I really don't know why I haven't gotten around to reading it. Maybe I've just had other more pressing large fantasy tomes. No, you know what it was? I think the time I was about to start reading this was right when I started The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and then that took over my life. Sorry, Grace of Kings, I am gonna get to you someday, I promise. I'm also really proud of the fact that I got this book for $3.97, and on top of that, a 40% employee discount, and I am just enough of a bargain hunter to just be really pleased with myself for that. And then the last book that I've had since before we moved is Ilium by Dan Simmons. Dan Simmons is one of my favorite science fiction authors. He wrote the Hyperion, Endymion, I forget what the name of that series is called. I think it's just the Hyperion series. That's basically like a retelling of the history of Western literature in outer space. And this is a retelling of the story of the Trojan War and the Iliad on Mars. I really want to read this. Again, giant thick fantasy tome. I can only read so many of those at one time before I start to just wires cross altogether. So those three I've had since before I moved to Seattle. The one I've had the next closest length of time, which I'm going to say is probably a year and a couple months now, is The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. This is actually somewhat tangentially connected to the Dan Simmons novel because it was blurbed to me as perfect for fans of Dan Simmons, and I know it's about Jesuit scientists and linguists traveling through space. It just recently celebrated a big anniversary, the 20th anniversary of the book's publication. I think maybe I was in the middle of reading a Dan Simmons book, which is why I didn't pick this one up exactly when I bought it, because I was kind of already reading a book that was in that mindset, and I don't like to read books at the same time that are too similar to each other. It's too easy for confusion to happen. But this is definitely still a book that I'm very interested to read. And then the final two I picked up at around the same time, which was the Christmas winter holiday season last year. Wait, no, sorry, 2017 last year. It is 2019 now, but these I've had since late 2017, so a little over a year and change. And that is All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders, which is about an ancient society of witches and a hipster technological startup going to war as the war tears itself apart. So it definitely sounds like a really interesting sort of star-crossed lovers story, but it's like weird sci-fi fantasy. Not exactly sure. I think this takes place in like a futuristic version of our world, but I remember picking this up in the bookstore where I was working at the time and reading the first few pages and being really intrigued by the premise of the story. Once again, it is really hard to pass up an employee discount of getting the books for wholesale price, so I couldn't. And then the final book, yes, I realize this is more than 5. However, I wanted to round it out with the things that had actually all been on my shelf in that same bracket of time I just explained, is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I know that this is a classic of modern fantasy, but I haven't ever actually read the book. I watched the movie as a kid. I was super traumatized by it. I think I have talked about that before, but there's like a talking alcoholic skeleton that is obsessed with getting a hold of wine that really freaked me the flip out when I was a kid. Yeah, and I just have such a vivid memory of watching the movie as a child, and also knowing what I now know, as an adult about Peter S. Beagle and like his importance in fantasy literature and writing. I figured it was time to pick up this book and give it a shot. So those are all of the books that I have for this week's Top 5 Wednesday. Do you have any books that have been sitting on your bookshelves for some length of time, peering at you with their judging eyes? Or maybe not so judging, maybe more just forgiving and excited for you to one day pick them up. Let me know if you do down in the comments below, or if you have read any of those books and you'd like to make the case for me to bump them towards the top of my TBR. I am also accepting applications for that. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.